So what he's saying there is that the Judeo-Christian worldview, and in particularly in Christianity as it became the dominant religion in Western civilization, introduced a notion of what is referred to as a division of sovereignty, divided sovereignty. So instead of the state being this omnipotent entity which was divine in itself, in a lot of the pagan world, a lot of the leaders were considered to be God. And so if the leader is God, you don't have the need for divided sovereignty. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the leaders are fallible human beings. So therefore their sovereignty is not unlimited. And you have, like in the Jewish tradition, the prophets, priests, and the king, they're not the same people. So you have the prophet on one hand and the king on the other hand, and they're not always agreeing. You have divided sovereignty. In the Christian tradition, this notion developed. You have the church had a realm of responsibility vis-a-vis the state. Even prior to the American Revolution, where you had a state church, in theory, they had different roles. And so that's where the American notion of separation of church and state comes from. And so this understanding of divided sovereignty is one of the keys to human liberty, because if you have the divided sovereignty, you have more space for human freedom of action. If you have one uniform sovereignty and there's no competition for sovereignty, the state versus civil society, the different institutions within civil society, religious, economic competition. Within the state, you have local, state, and federal. Different branches, executive, judicial, and legislative. So this is all examples of divided sovereignty. And as you divide up sovereignty and you have a competition over power, then there's more room for individual freedom and individual initiative. And this is what was considered to be the prerequisite of a just and free society, according to the vision that gave rise to American civilization. On the other hand, some of these utopian visionaries considered this vision, which limits sovereignty. If you limit sovereignty, you limit the ability of the best and brightest of socially engineered perfect society. Therefore, this vision is detrimental to the creation of this just social order. So, two totally different views on how to create a just social order. And one view was gaining currency for a while, and then it kind of retreated. And make no mistake about it, it did retreat. We kind of gave up the moral high ground. We gave up control over a lot of these institutions. The taking over of these institutions did not happen in a vacuum. So the forces of collectivism, the forces of social engineering, can be rolled back, but it has to be rolled back by an aggressive promotion of, by aggressive I'm referring to in a nonviolent sense obviously, but an aggressive proactive promotion of the principles and ideas of freedom. The Declaration of Independence is structured in a certain way. The beginning of the Declaration of Independence is a ringing affirmation of this vision of freedom. Only then, after this is all laid out, does it list the grievances against the king. And most people throughout society remember this ringing affirmation of freedom. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Very few people remember the list of grievances against the king. But one of the problems of the proponents of freedom nowadays is that we begin and end with a list of grievances against the king. Where would the Declaration of Independence and this vision began? I mean, where would it went? How far would it went if it began and ended with a list of grievances against the king? And that is something that we need to keep in mind. If we're going to reestablish the American vision of ordered liberty under law, then at least as much emphasis has to be put into proactively proclaiming this vision and what it means for the justice, why the individual liberty and the just social order are necessary for one another. At least as much, if not more so, focus has to be put into this than exposing all the problems with the other side. They're doing this, and they're doing this, and they're doing this. This is like a list of grievances against the king. And it's necessary, and it needs to be put. But we need to lead with the positive affirmation of our own vision and values. And so this is, like I said, this is part 7. Part 8, we're going to go into the logical conclusion of the unconstrained vision, and it's going to be referred to as last totalitarianism. We're going to talk about totalitarianism and as it rose up in the 20th century and it gave rise to the most violent century in human history. And ideologically, it came from some of the same sources, but it's taken to a much further extreme. So that will be the next session.